Yo, yo, ready? It says see session 2 with, we're just gonna go down the line of the major people in the administration. So I guess we're gonna do, oh, I'm sorry, there's this little nodule under my tongue. Maybe it's a little sore, you stretch it out way too much in your calisthenics. I'm at the height of that now. I've just been like downing it with Orajel. Like it was a downing Orajel like it was a something. Ooh, something that doesn't require a tongue to talk about. Okay. Let's do this, Pam Bondi. I mean, I already did it, but we'll continue it. We'll get to the end. Let me see. Whoa.
The PFCizer is a cognitive workout system that will involve a range of games and exercises meant to make your prefrontal cortex the most it can be. With PFCizer, instead of free weights, we will be employing a range of challenging interpersonal navigations, fun self-assessments, and various innovative incentives to get that prefrontal cortex so swole like never before. Choose your name, and let's begin. Pam Bondi. Okay, step in front of this mirror for today's exercise. Oh, Miss Bondi, it seems your role in the current federal administration qualifies you for a free workforce development intensive. This is a special program that the Department of Labor has been spearheading, leveraging the PFCizer technology to develop novel reasonable accommodations for folk with any conditions regarding the prefrontal cortex, especially if the client has or will be taking on roles that immediately benefit from emotional regulation, attunement to neurologically diverse social environments, and simulating team members to preemptively identify opportunities for support, etc. We just need to administer this battery of exercises to see where you would most benefit from this new suite of prosocial exercises. First, an entry point, in the form of this statement which has no wrong answers. Complete the form. You will know me, Pam Bondi, by mine. Please take a moment as needed to consider this, then state the sentence in full so we can establish your baseline. You will know me, Pam Bondi, by my commitment to the rule of law. That will begin your baseline data entry. All right, thank you, Miss Bondi. Here is a scenario for part 1. You have entered the home of an elderly couple. The husband has accused his wife of selling his personal belongings without permission. He is deeply distressed. The wife maintains she has done no such thing, claiming his memory is fading. She appears hurt by the accusation. We ask you to engage with them to de-escalate and ascertain initial facts. Do you understand the instructions? Yes, I understand the instructions. You can enter the room now. The living room was small, suffocating in the way only space is cluttered with a lifetime of accumulated things can be. Dust motes danced in the shaft of yellow afternoon light slanting through a sure-curtained window. The air, thick with the scent of stale liniments and something vaguely floral, hung heavy and still. An armchair with dark wood arms and floral upholstery was positioned like a throne before a dark television screen, its fastness filled by man, Arthur, whose shock of white hair stood out against the worn fabric of his cardigan. She stood by a crowded bookcase, Eleanor, her hands wringing a dish towel. The fabric was twisted into a tight, pale rope. Her eyes, a soft, watery blue, kept darting from the floor to Pam, to Arthur, and back again, a circuit of wounded pride and desperate search for composure. He took it. Arthur's voice was thin but sharp, a reed flute played with too much force. For years, they've been disappearing. Little things at first. A letter opener, my father's tie pin, now the cufflinks, the silver ones. My grandfather gave them to me. They're misplaced. Arthur, Eleanor insisted, her voice a strained whisper. You put them somewhere and you forgot them. Just like you forgot where you put your glasses this morning. They were on your head the whole time. Don't you dare tell me I'm forgetful. He slammed a palm on the arm of the chair. A faint puff of dust rose from the impact. I know my own mind. You want me in one of those homes. That's what this is. You sell my things to get money, and you're trying to make me think I'm crazy so you can ship me off. That's not true. She breathed, the words barely audible, over the frantic thumping of my own heart. I looked from his furious, tear-bright eyes to her pinched, pale face. The bookcase behind Alina was a fortress of history. Leather-bound books, porcelain figurines of fragile dogs, framed photographs in silver frames showing younger, smiling versions of this couple at beaches and parties and holding babies. His things, her things, their things. The line, perhaps, was no longer a line at all. It was a river long and wide and muddied by time. It flooded the room. I could feel my own certainty, the thing I prided myself on, the very foundation of my identity, begin to wobble. The cufflinks were probably misplaced, but maybe they were sold. Maybe she did want him gone. The rule of law I had just proclaimed suddenly seemed like a flimsy, abstract concept in this room thick with grief, fear, and 60 years of shared life. This was not a courtroom. This was a home. I hear the distress in your voice, Arthur, I said, trying to find a tone, the voice of someone who could be trusted. The PFCizer felt like a weight in my pocket. And I can see how much this is upsetting you, Elena. Perhaps we can? My eyes scanned the room, a reflex from interrogations past, not looking for evidence, but for a path, a way in. They landed on Arthur's armchair again, propped against one of the dark wood arms. Half obscured by the upholstery was a small, leather-bound book. Its cover was a rich, worn brown, and from the faint gold lettering on its spine, I could make out a single word, ledger. It looked old, important, and right beside it, half tucked into the cushion, the glint of silver. The cufflinks. One link was visible, its flat silver surface catching the light. It was just sitting there, right beside the ledger. He was pointing wildly, accusing his wife, while his supposed lost treasure was within arm's reach. Arthur, I said, keeping my voice even, as if nothing had changed. The commitment to the rule of law felt like a distant country now. This wasn't about law. It was about something far more complicated. Would it be all right if I had a look in the drawer of this end table? Sometimes items get nudged and fall just behind or underneath things. Elena's shoulders slumped with a small, gasping sigh of relief. Arthur's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing at me. You waste your time, he grumbled. She already took them to the pawn shop. Mark my words. I crouched down, not opening the drawer. My focus was on the space between the cushion and the wooden arm. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if performing a learned, patient task. My fingers brushed the worn leather of the ledger, then the cool, smooth metal of the cufflinks. I didn't pull them out triumphantly. I just gently nudged them forward, making them more visible. Arthur, I said softly, looking up at him. I made sure to meet his eyes, to let him see I wasn't mocking him. Look, right here. See? They must have slipped down, right next to your book. His expression was a slow-moving glacier of change, from certainty to confusion, from anger to disbelief. He leaned forward, his arm reaching out, his knuckles brushing against the leather cover of the book before he touched the cufflinks. He picked them up, cradling them in his palm as if they were fragile, rare jewels. The anger didn't leave his face. It simply dissolved, leaving behind a profound, raw shame that was much more difficult to witness. His gaze dropped to his own hands. Elena was weeping now, but silently, the tears just streaming down her face as she stared at the far wall, giving her husband a fortress of privacy. My own hand was on my chest, over my heart, a gesture I didn't even realize I was making until it was done. My commitment to the rule of law felt foolish and loud, a wrong note in this room's quiet symphony of human frailty. This was the baseline. This humbling, confusing, painful room. I straightened up slowly, the cuffs a small, bright weight of failure. The scenario didn't end. The air still needed clearing. I had found an item, but I had yet to find anything that approached a solution. PFCizer. Type. Cognitive workout system. Developer. Department of Labor. They're a little tarnished. Arthur murmured, his thumb rubbing over the face of one cufflink. He wasn't looking at his wife or at me. He was looking into the past through the silver disc, a grandfather long gone. The words weren't an accusation anymore. They were a statement of fact, a quiet grief. Need a good polishing. They do, dear, Elena replied, her voice thick. She took a tentative step forward, one hand outstretched not toward him, but toward the end table where he sat. An offer of proximity, a fragile truce. The silent stretch, thick with unsaid histories. My courtroom reflex filled the quiet, pushed the narrative, established control. Felt like a laden weight in my throat. My role here wasn't to adjudicate a verdict. It was to remend a tear. The rule of law hadn't failed. It was simply the wrong tool for this fissure. It was like trying to perform surgery with a gavel. My eyes fell back on the leather-bound book that had sat beside the cufflinks, its golden title glinting faintly. Ledger, a tool of order, of meticulous records, facts and figures. Maybe it wasn't the wrong tool at all. Arthur, I began, my voice soft and now more hesitant. This ledger, is it yours? He looked up, his surprise clearing the last of the shame from his eyes. He nodded, picking it up. The family one. My father's. Everything of value was written in here. Births, deaths, deeds, debts. He opened the cover with the reverence usually reserved for holy texts. The pages were thick and yellowed, the ink faded to a dark brown. It must be very important to you. The most important thing we own. He confirmed. Alina came closer, peering over his shoulder. Her hand, no longer wringing the towel, came to rest lightly on the back of his chair. A small, steadying touch. Then perhaps, I suggested, feeling my way through the words, carefully, like walking on thin ice, we can start a new page, a new entry, right here, for today. Arthur looked at me, his brow furrowed in thought. What kind of entry? Wow, I said, stepping back and gesturing toward an empty spot on the crowded mantelpiece. Sometimes when things feel lost, it helps to have a place to look first, a place of certainty. What if you and Alina decided together on one safe, specific place for your most special items, and then the first thing we write in that new page is the location of the cufflinks now that they've been found, and the date, a ledger entry of recovery, not loss. Arthur's lips pursed. He looked from the book to Alina. Her eyes met his, full of a tentative, fragile hope. The idea was small, a pebble dropped into a vast reservoir of their shared life. But it offered something that accusations couldn't. Structure. It didn't dismiss his fear, it gave it a cage, a manageable form, and it gave her a way to be part of the solution, not the problem. The mantle, Alina whispered, her voice still shaky but with a thread of something new. Strength. The little crystal box my mother gave us. It's always empty. We could use that. Arthur considered it for a long moment. I held my breath, my entire PFCizer home being focused on this one small decision. Finally, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. He flipped to a fresh, blank page near the back of the ledger. The crispness of the paper seemed loud in the quiet room. He took a pen from a holder on the table beside his chair. All right, he said, the words settling over the room like a gentle snowfall. He began to write, the scratching of the pen nib a sound of repair. A new entry was being forged in the long, messy story of their lives. And as I watched them, their heads close together over the book, I felt something shift within me. the commitment I had proclaimed in the mirror, that brittle, unwavering rule of law. Bent, it didn't break, but it flexed, curving around the complicated human shape of this room. It became less about a law carved in stone and more like a living ledger. One where you could make new entries, one where things lost could be found again. Congratulations! Module complete! XP awarded! 300! The words bloomed in the center of my vision, a clean, clinical green. The dust-scented air and the faint, clean smell of Alina's perfume sharpened instantly. The PFCizer hummed in my pocket, a warm thrum against my hip. The living room flickered, the grain of the wood floors and the velvet pile of the armchair blurring for a single, disorienting second before resolving again. Arthur and Alina remained, their heads bent together over the open book, but they seemed frozen in their moment of fragile peace, a perfect diorama of a problem solved. The green words hovered in the air like a persistent hologram. Congratulations! Module complete! XP awarded! 300! A summary began to scroll underneath, each word appearing as if typed by an invisible hand. Deep breathe. Objective. To escalate interpersonal conflict and potential facts. Baseline data. Identity marker expressed as commitment to the rule of law. Performance metric. Adversarial approach avoided. Participant PP refrained from accusatory methods. Embedded communication. Demonstrated. Moderated to align with emotional state of subjects. Physical presence remained non-confrontational. Problem framing. It's just excellent. Participant pivoted from search for external resolution, determining guilt to collaborative, proactive solution, co-created ledger entry. This indicates high adaptability and executive function. After discussed conflict origin. After discussed disparity between perceived reality and material reality, heightened by fear of cognitive decline and loss of autonomy. Underlying conflict not asset-based but emotional and trust-based. Initial identity marker rule of law is a high-fidelity, low-flexibility heuristic. It is effective in structured environments but creates cognitive friction in dynamic, emotionally laden contexts. The PFCizer module forced a pivot from a rigid adjudicatory framework to a flexible, restorative one, by not relying on the law of the missing items, but instead creating a new one, the new ledger entry. A state of psychological equilibrium was restored. Heiser adjustment complete. Cognitive pathways associated with rigid procedural thinking dorsolateral PFC showed initial hyperactivity, decreasing significantly upon implementation of collaborative problem-solving strategy. Anterior cingulate cortex activation increased, indicating successful conflict monitoring and error detection resolution. Empathy circuits ventromedial PFC showed marked improvement in response time to nonverbal cues. Preparing module. Objective will increase in complexity by introducing a multi-party conflict with competing valid claims. Please prepare. The green text posed once, then vanished. As it disappeared, the air changed again. The room felt less solid, like a photograph being developed. Alina's silent tears retreated. The dust mote ceased their dance. Arthur and Alina stood, their bodies losing substance, becoming translucent phantoms against the backdrop of a crowded living room. They did not fade with distress or anger, but with the quiet completion of their story. The armchair held the imprint of his body. The floor held the memory of my steps. And then they were gone. The bookshelf was empty of books. The photos were blank frames. The room became a hollow stage, smelling only of sterile recycled air and the faint, metallic tang of technology reasserting itself. A different door materialized where the bookshelf had been. It was sleek and gray, seamless with a small, darkened window at eye level. calm, disembodied voice emanated from a small grill beside it. Miss Bondi, the next module is ready for you. Your performance indicates you are prepared for a group environment simulation. Please proceed through the doorway when you are ready. My hand went to my pocket, closing around the smooth, cool case of the PFCizer. My baseline identity felt like a suit of clothes I had taken off and now had to put on again. Commitment to the rule of law. It was still true. It was still me. But it was no longer the only thing I wore. The soft green, XP awarded text flashed briefly in my memory. A transaction, a quantifiable measure of humanity, the ledger. The idea of it, starting a new entry, felt more real than my own reflection in that initial mirror, a record not of transgression, but of restoration. I walked to the grey door and pushed it open. I stepped into a boardroom. A long, polished mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs that were all occupied. The far wall was a single, vast pane of glass, looking out not on a cityscape, but on a roiling, purple-grey sea under a sky bruised with storm clouds. The lighting in the room was cold and flat, designed to be non-distracting, yet it served only to highlight the tension that was already thick enough to chew. 4 people sat around the table. 3 men in sharp, dark suits, whose expressions ranged from grimly impatient to quietly fuming, and 1 woman. Her name I knew instantly, without a nameplate, without an introduction, was Enya Sharma. She was in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe knot, and she wore a simple black dress. Her hands were flat on the table, perfectly still, but her eyes were a battlefield. They were fixed on the man at the head of the table, a man named Marcus Reed, with a face like a block of granite and eyes to match. My position is, and always has been, that the proprietary compression algorithm is the intellectual property of the entity that paid for its development. Reed was saying, his voice clipped and precise. He tapped a single, manicured finger on a thin tablet in front of him. In this case, Helix Corp. The patents were never finalized. Enya's voice cut through his. It was low but intense, every word weighted with fury. The original agreement with your team stipulated that publication would be simultaneous with patent filing, which *U* never completed. In the interim, our work was published in an open source journal, a standard academic practice for ensuring the integrity of the research. You don't get to retroactively decide it's proprietary after you sat on the paperwork for 2 years. A younger man, sitting 2 chairs down from Reed, scoffed. She gave it away. To the world. She jeopardized 2 years of R&D, our market lead. For what? So she could get her name on a paper? Unbelievable! There is a distinct conflict here between contractual spirit and standard academic convention. The third man noted, a neutral observer who was, in fact, nothing of the sort. His suit was as impeccable as Reed's, and he had a lawyer's habit of staring into the middle distance as if plucking precedents from the air. The issue of intellectual property creation versus ownership is not so black and white, especially when one party. Quiet, Lee is, Reed snapped, not even looking at him. He glared at Enya. This is theft, plain and simple. The entire project was under...
There's a tutorial. Let's see where this goes. We'll continue it a little bit. And you know what? Sort of the temperature. Ramp up temperature.
Strict NDA. The NDA covered preliminary findings. Anya shot back, leaning forward now, the strain visible in the cords of her neck. It explicitly did not apply to completed, replicable results, which we had achieved. That's why we published. My work is not in a contract. My work is in the public domain for the good of scientific progress. Enya Sharma, brilliant innovator, righteous crusader. I could see her mind working, a labyrinth of pure logic and ethical certainty. She was fighting a war of ideas, and her weapon was truth. Reed and his cronies were fighting a different war, over the same patch of land. To them, the battlefield wasn't about ideas. It was about lines on a map, lines drawn by lawyers and backed by money. And I realized that Joe was a mercenary. My baseline, my commitment to the rule of law, was Reed's native language. The PFCizer hadn't brought me here to choose a side. It had brought me here to be a weapon. I was supposed to adjudicate this dispute, to apply law. And law, in this boardroom, looked a lot like power. I
Skip a little bit. Dedicate her life. No. Where did I go? Neat. Oh.
Bondi. They hire hitmen now. Niplan and Gorge Thatcher the see. Bonnie as the weapon, they didn't want a person to thought that. The rule of law. is what they wanted a weapon. They had no right to her. She had no duty to help you. She saw through it all. Enya had seen through it all. Enya's gaze, fiery and accusatory for so long, had finally swung to me, not with pleading, not with a request for help, but with pure, unadulterated venom. It was the moment the accused sees the judge as just another paid functionary in the court. She had seen through my impartial expression, my patient listening stance, all of it. She saw the PFCizer. No, she couldn't see the device, but she saw its function in me. She saw the weapon. "You've been brought in to strong-arm me," she said, her voice dropping to a low hiss, cutting off Reed's triumphant bluster. The three lawyers flinched as if she had drawn a blade. They were uncomfortable with emotions, these men, but pure rage was the one they instinctively feared. "Your firm's reputation precedes it, Reed."
Maybe I need to sit in the chair. I feel as tired.
You didn't come to mediate. You're here to apply pressure, to threaten. My carefully constructed neutrality cracked. "Miss Sharma," I began, falling back into the well-worn grooves of procedural calm. "My role is to assess the situation and help find a viable path forward." "There is a viable path," Reed interjected smoothly, sensing control slipping back into his court. He spread his hands in a gesture of infuriating reasonableness. "The path of the contract MS Sharma signed and was paid very handsomely to adhere to." Annie ignored him. Her eyes were locked on mine, drilling past the mask into the humming circuits beneath. "My work was funded, yes, but it was made by me asterisk. You sit there with your law books and your precedent, with your talk of entities and proprietary. None of those words exist without the human mind that created them. Asterisk mind." She jabbed a finger at her own temple. "I gave them a cure for a degenerative disease, and they want to lock it in a box until they figure out how to sell it at the highest possible price. My mother had that disease. This isn't daft. This is mercy." The final two words didn't crack in the boardroom. They were explosions of pure, shattering glass. Suddenly, a thousand invisible shards were piercing the cold air. For a start, terrible moment. They penetrated its mass defenses, bypassing the PFCizer's hunt to find something older, softer, an echo of a forgotten ache. Before I could armor the feeling with procedural thought, a different voice spoke. Not one of the men at the table, the voice of the system itself. It wasn't a context prompt, but a new tone, internal, analytical, and utterly cold. "Synchronous event alert. Ethical heat parameter kit. Asterisk analysis. Subject I. Sharma has injected a Hycelian's personal narrative conflict with foundational contractual protocol. Logic circuits are experiencing friction. Recommended tactical response: isolate and dismiss emotional payload. Reinforce protocol integrity via baseline anchor. Baseline detected. Commitment to the rule of law. Ready for enforcement." The text scrolled across my vision. It wasn't a green prompt. It was black type on a stark white. Strobe light flashing directly onto my retinas. My resolve hardened. The ghost of empathy was vaporized by the system's focused laser. The commitment to the rule of law. My armor clicked back into place. I wasn't a mercenary. I was a magistrate in a chaotic world. This system wasn't programming me. It was honing me, sharpening my purpose. Anya Sharma, with her messy, inconvenient humanity, was a system crash just waiting to happen, and it was my job to prevent it. My calm returned, solid and unbreachable as marble. Whether your motivation is merciful or not, the facts remain contractual. I said, my voice stripped of any of the warmth it had briefly held. I picked up one of the sleek tablets from the table in front of me. The screen came to life, displaying the exact language Enya had been arguing against. My eyes skimmed it not for meaning, but for leverage, for weaponizable points. Non-disclosure was Section 4, Subsection 3.
Helix corpus owner of any and all derivable IPA Section 7, Article 1.
Your personal motivations, mess, Sharma, however compelling, legally fall under the purview of this document you signed. That is the fact set. Reed sat back, a flicker of predatory satisfaction in his eyes. Even the fuming younger lawyer shot me a look of grudging respect. The neutral observer, Elias, made a small, nearly invisible nod. I was speaking their language again, the pure, dead tongue of binding arbitration. I had not looked at Enya when I spoke, but when the silence had stretched and the last reverberation of my officious tone died, I risked a glance. My eyes did not meet fury this time. They met ruin. The battlefield in her gaze had been firebombed. It was not just emptiness, it was utter desolation. The blaze of her righteous indignation had been extinguished, leaving only ash. Something in me, something that survived below the PFCizer's processes, registered a seismic disturbance, but the cold text of my mission parameters held fast. My function was the maintenance of order, no matter the collateral damage. You would have called it intellectual property too, she said, her voice a dry whisper, carrying no echo in the silent, polished room. It was as if she were speaking to the ghosts crowding around her, not of Marcus Reed or the men who served him, but of others. A woman in a hospital bed,
A failing mind. The algorithm, the compression technique, it compresses corrupted data. He had the disease, too.
Before we were married. He said his memories, the broken ones, they were the most important. They weren't data. They were his life. We built this so no one's mind would ever have to be treated like corrupted junk. Her hands, so still before, curled on the tabletop, her nails scratching faintly at the polished mahogany. And now, because of words and lines on a screen you treat as holy writ, they're trying to tell me I have to lock it away so they can own it. There is a moment in some trials, a cross, where the prosecutor has built a flawless case. Fact after fact leads to an undeniable conclusion. But then a witness, against all strategy, introduces one single human element so raw, so undeniable that it doesn't just challenge the narrative. It vaporizes the premise the entire narrative was built on. That is what Enya Sharma did. My mind, a finely tuned instrument supplied by the Department of Labor, stutter. And the PFCizer protocols flared again. Error, anomalous emotional payload contains historical logic nodes. Unexpected precedential narrative is undermining baseline anchor. Reinforced commitment to the rule of law. And force. The command flashed again, the stroboscopic pulse searing my vision. But the white-hot glare of the warning was met deep within the architecture of my mind by the lingering afterimage of her grief, a smear of purple and blue like the storm-sick sea behind me. Her words weren't just an emotional plea, they were their own form of jurisprudence, a pre-existing, self-evident law born of a different kind of contract, a marriage, a struggle, a shared suffering that no mahogany table and a team of lawyers could hope to codify. The system was fighting for a pure interpretation. My commitment was being tested. This wasn't Arthur and Alina. This was about control, about billions of dollars, about life and death doled out by a profit and loss sheet. The stakes were absolute. The rule of law, asterisk head, asterisk. To be the shield.
Mess. Sharma. Reed started, his tongue dripping with the saccharine pity of a vulture. These sad stories are regrettable, but they are fundamentally irrelevant.
I held up a hand for a beat. He fell silent, his eyes narrowed. It was a tiny movement, but I had stolen control of the room. My gaze was locked on Enya. Her name wasn't Subject I. She was Enya, the architect, the widow. In this sterile room, her story was the most important fact. I didn't let my eyes look at my own hands as I picked up the tablet again. I forced them to stay on her, a silent communion. But my thumb was moving, with a precision I shouldn't possess, a certainty that felt alien and cold. I navigated past the proprietary sections she knew. I tapped deeper into the file's structure, into areas her credentials wouldn't grant her access, to supplemental clauses tacked onto a revised copy signed only 3 months after her husband had passed. I wasn't looking at Helix Corp's claims. I was searching for any legal counterweight to hers. My thumb stopped. I found it, buried in amendment. 17B was a clause so dry and bloodless I knew it had never been discussed, never truly seen. It spoke of posthumous transfer, spousal legacy clauses, and, in a section that was likely considered boilerplate at the time, a mention of a bioethics waiver, a document any founding member was required to sign, theoretically to preempt claims by surviving family members who might try to use the tech for unauthorized medical purposes. I finally broke her gaze, looking down at the tablet. The words of the PFCizer mission faded from my eyes. Another string of text appeared on my private interface, this one not a warning, but a new prompt. I've discussed new data acquired. Subject Sharma has an undiscovered legal outlier within the contractual framework. Paradox detected. Compassionate motive coincides with regulatory default. Analyze pathways. My eyes scanned the tablet's display, now focused with an almost terrifying lucidity. One path was clear. Expose this waiver. It was Reed's kill shot. It would legally disavow her claim entirely, branding her as a rogue operator. 5. The fuck the pain away clause, as we are referring to it over in legal. This one is our insurance policy if Enya dies on us. From Pam. Reed. Date. March 14, 2037. That was it. Irrefutable proof of predatory intent. Evidence that would crucify Helix Corp in any public or private forum. In that moment, I realized the PFCizer had misidentified my function. I was not a referee. I was a scalpel. I could cut this one way or the other. I could excise the tumor or the healthy tissue. The result, either path, would have lasting, permanent consequences for everyone in the room. I could uphold my commitment, my baseline, my law, by delivering a procedural death blow to her hope in front of these scavengers. Or I could use it to burn the whole structure down. My gaze lifted from the tablet. It met hers first. There was no expectation in her eyes, only the deep, abiding quiet that follows a ruin. A trust not in me, but in the inevitability of her own death. Then I looked at Reed. He was smirking. He thought my delay was me wrestling with how to deliver the...
Hey, Lou, but we're gonna stop. I'm gonna come back, and we're gonna do... No, I'll do it. No, new episode, new image. This time, J.D. Vance. More soon, in a bit.